Good morning, all. Today we are going to discuss about the properties of information and the importance of how do one's value the information because this particular chapter is basically on the whole idea of how uh, the value becomes very important and in economics how one can basically value that information, because normally we see that actually information is given and seldom we do have actually value sort of a valuation of this particular kind, because all if suppose we are talking about a market, then we do consider that in the earlier setting that is information is given, right? So I know that what is actually there in the market to buy, as well as the seller know that what is actually there to sell in that sense. So the information in that sense is being always treated as symmetric, and therefore the issue of valuation of or to say a good information or a bad information had no relevance in the earlier setting, because the information was symmetric in that sense. So the good bad dichotomy never exists in that sense. But from that particular point towards from that particular point to the other kind of a real world scenario where information is always a problem, like some people may be having higher information or good information than the other person, and in that sense somebody may be getting actually a better commodity or a better price because they have a better information in that sense. So once you have all this kind of information asymmetric world, things are going to be different. So this particular module itself is going to talk about the information asymmetry and the resulting issues regarding the information asymmetry as well as information symmetry. So let us basically start the question how one can actually talk about this particular idea called information, and how the valuation of that particular information is being done. So when a very typical microeconomic framework, we will try to see how one can basically look into the problem. So in that sense, properties of information is the most crucial thing in the very beginning itself. That is, information is not easy to define. It is difficult to measure the quantity of information obtained from different actions. In that sense, there are too many forms of useful information to permit the standard price quantity characterization used in supply and demand framework in that sense. So studying the information also becomes difficult due to some technical properties of information, such as it is durable and retain value after its use, and it can be non-drival and non-excludable. These two characteristics are very information as far as the information itself is concerned. Once you reveal, that becomes a common knowledge in that sense. So in this manner it can be considered as a public good. So once you know that what is an information, why people earlier been talked about information symmetry, because once you reveal, then it is known to everyone in that sense. So it becomes a public good. So and in that sense difficult to value the price of a public good and who is going to actually pay for it and all is all the difficult question which one had encountered in the beginning itself. It doesn't mean that economists are not aware of all that. And given that situation, many respect lack of information does represent a problem involving uncertainty for a decision maker. So the issue of uncertainty and the module in fact precedes this module in your syllabus is in fact I am going to teach subsequently, after dealing with the information. So it would be always nice that why that particular uncertainty things will be discussed in because it is only valid in the premise of an information asymmetry in that sense. So the individual may not know exactly what the consequence of a particular action will be once there is an information asymmetry. So that is or a bad information. So better information can reduce uncertainty and lead to better decision and higher utility. Why in the advertising companies basically spending a lot of money, some people may be wondering, because of actually creating a sort of information which they want to supply for their consumer, and they want to fence their consumer basically based on that kind of an information. So information in that sense is a kind of it itself produces some sort of idea towards the buyer in that sense, or even in the context of a seller, whether there is a good buyer for your product, etc. So in that sense, either the way information works perfect in that sense, perfect in the market, and giving you a price better maybe or worse, but that we will discuss very soon. Now, assume an individual forms subjective opinions about the probability of two states of world. Let us put the first world as a good world, and the other one is a bad world in that sense. See, the good world and bad world is only, metaphoric, because the good world is basically uh, follow from the fact that it is actually having a very good information. In that sense, people are actually highly informed in that sense. So the bad world, because it is actually bad information, or information is not properly being disseminated in that sense. So the good time probability represents with a pi g, and bad time represents with a pi b in that sense. And information is valuable because it helps the individual revise his estimates of these probabilities. And once you have this probability of good information and bad information, you can also assume that information can be measured by the number of message which purchase. So that means how many messages which you have is going to be basically the stock of your information in that sense. So if you can buy more, if you can afford more m, then you can basically have a better information in that sense, and your price would be better in that. So it is all related in that. So you can typically formulate the microeconomic understanding in the particular setting in that sense. So pi g and pi b will be function of m in that sense. So once you have a higher packet of information, that is also going to be determining whether you have a pi g or a pi b in that sense. So once you have all this thing, then you can immediately formulate a certain entity equation in that sense of an expected utility kind. And expected utility is nothing but whether what is the kind of your utility in your expectation in that sense. So expected utilities, this is a concept which was Newman Morgenstein introduced, but I'll come to that uncertainty portion to deal with this expected utility in a detail in a couple of lecture later. Now, if you have expected utility formulating with the information, then you have a pi g uwg plus you have a pi b uwb in that sense, subject to your information, that is actually pgw plus, or you can say that it's your income in that sense. So if you have an income which is pgwg plus pbwb plus pm, because the number of amount which you paid, the price which you paid for the information, packet of information, that packet of information plus that packet of information is also a function of a good information, set of good information, and a bad information, summation of all the good and bad information. So summation of all the good and bad information plus the amount which you spend for the packet of information, that is your aim, is also going to determine your level of income in that sense. So we need to set up the same. To understand in a Lagrangian case, you can apply a Lagrangian multiplier for that, and you substitute all the equation along with that which is given. So once you have all this thing, then you can have a first order condition for a constraint maximization, which is nothing but the dou L by dou WG, which is equal to the pi g utility of WG minus the lambda PG, which is of course going to be 0. And for the other case also, you have a bad information case, you have WL by dou L by dou WB, which is nothing but the probability of bad information, whether that U or WB in that, minus the lambda P, which is also going to be 0 in that sense. So that is going to be a net effect which is going to be 0 in that sense. which will give you the total value of the information based on the calculation which you are going to make. So once you have this thing, then you have a dou L by dou M, which is going to be pi g u dash w g times w your dwg by dm, plus you have also a wb u dash wb times the difference of w division of w dwb uh, of dwd and dm in that sense. Once you have all this thing in place, then if you add all the other values like uwg times d pi g by dm plus uwb times dwb by dm, which is also the first portion, and minus your lambda pg and dwg by dm, and the other lambda again minus lambda pb, which is actually the case which I have mentioned earlier. So once you have the Lagrangian multiplier to see that whether there is a difference in the calculation of the original kind, literally you are not going to make, if you add lambda as constant, things are not going to change in that sense of your calculation. So once you are done with that, then you can say that the first two equations shows that the individual will maximize utility at a point where the subject ratio of expected marginal utility is equal to the price ratio of PG by P B. That is, your good information and your bad information is going to actually give you a kind of uh, you know maximization in that sense. So the last equation shows that that is the second one, which shows that the maximization level of information to buy. So how much you have to buy, etc., would be understood from this particular equation. Once you have done that, then the level of information that a person buys will depend on the price per unit of that information, and information cost may differ significantly across individual, and some may possess specific skill for acquiring information, and some may have experience that is relevant, or some may have made different formal investment in information services, etc. So these are actually the kind of mechanism in which one the information makes its own relevance. And once you have all this information, then specifically one can make a very good investment or a bad investment depending on this information. So why people are relying on too much relying on different advertisement, and the advertisement, of course, companies are spending lots of money for their advertisement, because they want to actually give a sort of information which the buyers need to buy, and that will create a kind of fencing around their product in the real market. So this is why information being also advertised, as well as on the other side the people who are being information bought in. And some people, if they have an experience, they will buy that information which will be supplied by the advertising company. On the contrary, some may not be actually doing this because they may have a other experience of that kind. So this is also depends, and based on that, they can make good or bad choices, or good or bad decision making in that sense. So this is what is actually the importance of information. Now, once you have a very good information, nobody is going to check whether your decision is actually bad or not. Once, logically, it is making no sense, basically. Therefore, you leave that aside. But on the contrary, most of the time, what happens is that your information and the things which you bought, and the other things may not be actually go hand in hand. In that context, you have to basically suspect that the information which you bought may be or may not be reliable in that sense. Okay, so once you have this clause placed, and then it is immediately says that no information asymmetry prevails. Now once you have information asymmetry prevails, then most of the time the purchase of commodity will be leading to a bad kind of a situation in that sense. So for example, Akerlof had made a wonderful demonstration of the Delhi car market case while he was in ISI Delhi, and he basically had done wonderful observation as well as formulated that is and that is get published later. So this is what has actually earned him also the Nobel Prize in that sense. So the kind of mechanism, the information is become relevant uh, ever since the 1970s itself. And many people had worked on it, Akelov and after, later, for example, Stiglitz and many had worked on this information aspect of the real market. And the information is actually the driving force behind any decision making. I mean the asymmetry of information. Those who have a higher information would always actually had an edge in the market, and that higher information is also equally important to have, whether that higher information is whether that is a good information or a bad information, and that valuation is what we have done earlier in that sense. So let us look into the example how Akerlof had arrived at this sort of an information asymmetry case. So this is about the market. As I said, the market for used cars, quality of used cars differs. There are good quality used cars as well as bad quality used car. If buyers and sellers can distinguish between high and low quality cars, there will be two market in that. And typically buyers are less informed than the seller, because the seller know that what is actually the problem the car, because they are the owner or a kind of people who had more information than the other person in that sense. So there is an information gap between the buyer and seller in this particular model, and this is what is called the market for lemon problem. What is this market for lemon case? It is nothing but once you have two kind of market, say the market for high and low quality cars, when buyers and sellers can identify each cars. Okay, so you have basically two diagrams which is given, and in that two diagram, if it is a good quality car, your price would be higher, and if the low quality car, the price would be lower in that. So higher quantity, higher price for good, and you have a demand which is also expected to be higher in that sense. But at the same time, that low quality car comes with a low price, and therefore quantity also will be sold lesser in that sense. So this is what is actually normally the setting. With the asymmetry of information, buyer will find it difficult to determine quality, and they lower their expectation of the average quality of used car. Demand for low and high quality used car shift to the demand for the other, that is DM. For example, the shift, there is a downward shift. At the same time, low quality cars have an upward shift in their demand curve, because the people are not actually aware of this fact, and the increase in the quality, the quantity of that is increase in the low quality QL reduces expectation and demand of DLM. The adjustment process continue until the demand gets equal to DL in that sense. So this is what is actually the kind of uh, uh, settings which is Akerlof trying to make. So what does it mean? It is a simple mechanism, that is, you have a two sort of different quality cars, and that has actually been marketed, and the buyer comes for this thing, and they don't know much about the market, since they know some information, but the seller is always have a better information. So once, even if it is a good quality car, they will always price very high in that sense, because they know that it's a good quality car, but buyer don't know in that sense. At the same time, on the contrary, if it is a bad quality car, they will be also have a low price, but they are actually more prone to negotiation in that sense. So what happened literally is that the demand for the low quality will increase, at the same time that the demand for the good quality car will fall in that sense, and finally it will get the difference between good and bad for a buyer turns out to be minimal, And this is in fact what happens. It's in fact it drives the good quality car away from the market, at the same time give more priority towards the bad quality car. So this is what is actually happens with the market for used cars, and sellers has an incentive to put the low quality used cars in the market than the good quality used cars. So buyer anticipate that they are only willing to pay the price of a lemon for the used cars, and too many low and too few high quality cars on the market in that sense, and low quality goods drive the high quality out of the market. And this is what is actually happens in the real world. And one side the transaction knows less than the other side, and information asymmetry leads to economic efficiency. And two kinds of information asymmetry prevails in this case. One side of the transaction know about herself or himself, but the other side doesn't, and it's called adverse selection. This is actually primarily based on the first hand information kind of thing, and one side can also take the action that the other side cannot observe, and this is called the moral hazard problem. So normally within the information asymmetry, in a nutshell, you have two type of problem. First one is an information asymmetry, which is results because an adverse selection, which is called an ex ante problem. The other one is called the moral hazard problem, which is called an expose case. That is actually once before the business, you go for the bad quality car kind of thing, which is called actually the you don't know actually whether it is bad quality, but you made an adverse selection because of your information, lack of information. But sometimes it is also goes wrong with actually, even you know that actually you have a better information and you chosen, but what happens, it turns out that the commodity is not performing very good in that sense. So in that context, what happens is it's called a moral hazard. I'll come to that in a detail in the business application of insurance or kind of thing. So it is possible for an insurance company to separate a high quality car, and impossible to insurance company to separate high and low risk policy holders. And if not, only high risk people will purchase the insurance. Adverse selection will make medical insurance unprofitable in that means that is why normally the older people, that is people with a specific age limit, has to pay a huge amount of premium for their insurance, because normally they feel that those who are going to take their insurance after a particular point, they are prone to have a higher ailment in that sense. But in that context, what happened is that even though the people who have higher quality of life or in good health also has to pay a very higher premium. And normally this is actually because it's an adverse selection in that sense, because you can't do it, because the company may be fixing, or on the contrary, they're also the demand, they are fixing a high price. At the same time, those who pay the higher price would normally be the kind of a higher risk category person in that sense. So in a very simple sense, normally the company ends up in an adverse selection, or at the same time also the buyer also can actually end up in a adverse selection. It's not only from the company's point, from the buyer's point of view. So also the same thing can happen. So the market for credit, on the contrary, gives a very different uh, case. Asymmetry of information creates the potential that only high risk borrowers will seek loans. How can credit history help make this market more efficient and reduce the cost of credit, is actually the kind of thing people were looking into. And information and insurance therefore is very closely related. There are number of information asymmetries in the market for insurance. Buyers are often in a better position to know the likelihood of uncertain event, may also be able to take actions that impact this probability. And on the contrary, the seller also has a sort of thing. I mean, I'm not actually saying that this is only helps the buyer in that sense. So, but on the contrary, you have a sellers also maybe do the same kind of action in that sense. So uh, uh, then this is about the information asymmetry because of the adverse selection. One, when it comes to the moral hazard problem, things are actually again affect in a very different situation. For example, insurance coverage on an individual decision to take an activity that may change the likelihood size of the loss in that sense. For example, I buy certain insurance and the insurance company says, yeah, we will give you every kind of thing, but in the end of the day they would be having some sort of a black box kind of a situation. For example, when I buy a car insurance, even bumper to bumper insurance, for example, B2B insurances for cars, what happens is that at the end of the day, when there is an accident comes and all, it is normally not actually uh, bumper to bumper. Why? They'll be telling you that those parts which is plastic, those parts which is fiber, those parts which is metal have insurance and all. So and such and such provisions of the insurance in that sense. So this is basically a hidden kind of an insurance. Then there is no point of calling it as bumper to bumper in that sense. Bumper to bumper, bumper comes with plastic also, but you cannot actually have a plastic. Then they will say that all kinds of excuses like, you cannot, we will not give you consumables, just like the papers and other stickers. Everything is part of the car in that sense, the company gives. So even if you lose that, then they'll say that no, we cannot actually give. Then again, it cannot be a bumper to bumper in that. But the consumer get to know only once they meet an accident in that sense. So these are actually kind of an ex post. No, you will get to know that whether your insurance is a complete insurance or not, once the incident is being taken to or in action in that. So that's the accident occurs or kind of thing happen. Only the event, after the event only you get to know whether the person is good or not. It's just like making a statement of hiring a person in a university. So the university would be looking at your profile, your publication, your research, your teaching ability, etc. Now, once you are hired, if there is no check and balance and all, then it is difficult to basically fire the people. And I'm not telling that you have to fire the people. No, no. There are many people who can actually flaunt in that sense. They give not a very good lecture and all. At the same time, some people do it. Okay, so when can only the employer get to know? Once they hire, and then they, if they don't have a mechanism of monitoring, what happens is that this is get basically moral hazard, and that or the hired person become a moral hazard for the buyer in that sense. So there are so many examples of the real world one can actually drag in. Suppose a risk covers individual faces the risk loss of an ill that will lower wealth. The probability of loss is pi, and this probability can be low by the amount that the person spend on preventive measures. Wealth in the two stage is given that W1, which is equal to W0 minus A, and W2 is equal to W0 minus A minus L, and individual choose to maximize their expected utility by making the same calculation which we have done earlier. So you have an expected utility case which is equal to E, which is equal to 1 minus pi of pi times uw1 plus pi times uw2. So your moral hazard is found out based on the first order condition of maximization, which is nothing but dou E by dou A, which is nothing but a negative utility which you accrue, that is your minus u w1 times dou pi by dou A minus 1 minus pi times u dash w1 plus the other example also in the same manner, that is uw2 times dou pi by dou A minus pi u dash w2, which is actually the case. So in that sense, the optimal point is where the expected marginal utility cost from spending one additional dollar on prevention is equal to the reduction in the expected value of the utility loss. Now, one major thing which we have to keep in mind is that, even if you spend in the real world information asymmetry, this is ideally, one can say that even if you keep spending on, then you can reduce your level of uncertainty in that sense. So you have more information, then you have less loss in that sense. So there is an inverse relationship between spending in information and but no, we should also keep in mind that once you have an information asymmetry, you cannot actually buy a complete information, because complete information turns your information asymmetry into a symmetric information case. So then that will turns out to the fact that is zero, if you have an infant. But in that sense, you have actually a premium rate which goes infinitely, but at the same time your uh, you know your risk will actually fall uh, to zero, not zero, because that is actually again on the other side you have to keep buying information. So this is actually, so you can't, what I'm trying to say is that you cannot actually uh, minimize your risk as zero, no risk, because then it becomes a certain world. Then there is no point of actually talking about an uncertainty. So there is always some sort of a risk involved, or that is why you are calling it is a risk. Actually, I'll come to that, the difference between the uncertainty and risk case in a while. So this is also have a reflection in the behavior of individual about the monitoring, about the aspects of whether you have to buy a good information or not, or whether you have to buy insurance or not, etc. would be depending on this aspect of considering of an adverse selection, computing of an adverse selection, minimizing of an adverse selection by through the way mechanism of information. And same the case with the moral hazard case. And I have already talked about the information as well as asymmetry of information given the adverse selection case context as well as in the moral hazard context. So to sum up, one can say that uh, there is a possibility of information buying which will reduce a better kind of an investment in that sense. So it will be having a lot of um, uh, implication in the real world due to information asymmetry. So this is what is actually I would like to talk about. Now, how do we resolve this problem? We will discuss in the upcoming lecture. Thank you so much for listening, and I would be stopping today.